Welcome to the first Hawk session of the day. I'm really excited to have y'all here. For anyone who I don't currently work with or haven't met yet, my name is Laura Shevlin, and I am a Senior Educational Courseware Representative here at Hawks Learning. And today's presentation is titled Elements of a Successful Course. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we jump into my presentation today, I wanted to ask you all, what makes a successful course? So feel free to use that Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, and I'd love to hear from you. What elements do you think make a successful course? I'll give it a minute here to let some of these answers come in. We've got organization, that's a good one. Engagement, connection to students. Rigor, that's a great one. Seeing a lot of engagement, we'll definitely talk about that today. Equity, that's a great one. Care. Great. I love these answers. I love reading what y'all have put in here. And support. Those are all wonderful answers and are all certainly elements of a successful course. Let me go ahead and move on here. So as we reflect on some of the responses that you all have provided with us today, I wanted to list some elements here on this slide to keep in mind as we're thinking about elements for success within Gateway courses. So a few that I've listed out here that you all have even said in the chat yourselves. Equity, so creating an accessible and inclusive learning environment that provides available support to each student, regardless of their level of need. Number 2 here, engagement. So using educational content to establish a strong relationship among students and instructors, and to motivate and promote progress within the classroom. Within the Hawks materials, we do connect students' academic lives to their personal and professional experiences for practical applications of concepts. Number 3 here, feedback. So providing prompt and detailed feedback that is customized to the student's current level of knowledge on a specific objective. This encourages remediation, development of a concept, and action from a student. Number 4, remediation. Using several flexible and formative assessments for students to best learn from the mistakes that they're making and how to prevent them on future assessments. The purpose of remediation is to increase students' performance and knowledge on concepts. Number 5 here, scalability and sustainability. Slightly changing the teaching and learning environment to fit each student's needs. This ensures that the level of attention does not decrease as the virtual environment shifts or the number of students increases in your class. Number 6, flexibility. So the ability to be able to be flexible, adjust due dates, adjust your course design, and adjust your assessments in order to accommodate each student's learning needs. And number 7 here, evidence-based analysis and decision-making. So the ability to analyze data that is measured based upon a student's ability to meet course objectives and expectations that are set by the instructor. This supports instructor intervention, improvement, and praise for your students. So now I'm going to jump over to the student side of the Hawks Learning courseware to show you how we connect each one of these elements into our software. So keep those elements that we just discussed and the ones that were on the screen here in the back of your head, because we will come back to those at a later time in the presentation today. But let me go ahead and switch gears over to the student side of our platform. So what I've pulled up here is the student side of Hawks Learning. This is what your students would see when they're logging into Hawks and accessing those homework assignments. I'm going to go ahead and click on a homework lesson here to show you what that looks like. So clicking on any lesson within Hawks will bring you to this same recommended learning path for all of our products. So what I've pulled up here is our college algebra course, but this 3-mode learning path is consistent across our English, psychology, sociology, and economics courses as well. We've laid out this 3-mode learning path for students as they're working through all of the Hawks homework lessons. So the first one here is our learn mode. This is where all of the instructional content is contained within the course. It matches up perfectly with the textbook and ebook that aligns with your course here. It's just broken out into smaller, more bite-sized chunks for students. So these 15 pages here are what students need to read through in order to be prepared to answer the upcoming homework questions for this particular lesson. Now, we do have some interactive elements kind of sprinkled throughout the Learn mode here. We do have video resources for students within our mathematics titles. So these example level videos will show an instructor working through the exact example that's on the screen down below. We also have a watch button here on the top left-hand side of the screen, which will pull what we call a lesson level video. This will give students an overview of everything that's covered in these 15 pages of content here in video format. So students can watch these videos before or after their reading just to make sure they didn't miss any of those concepts here. I will say for our humanities titles, we do have some alternative elements scattered throughout the Learn mode as well. We have group activity suggestions and reflection questions that you can actually pull out of the Learn mode and incorporate into class time for your students. So if you're teaching an online course, you could always structure those as discussion post questions for your students. Or if you're in a face-to-face lecture style course, just calling out to students during class time and opening up that discussion and having students engaging in those topics for discussion. The last thing I'll say about the Learn mode here is that it is customizable for you as an instructor. So this split screen here is just an example of one way that you can customize within Hawks. For example, if you had your own YouTube video or statistics simulation that you wanted to embed directly in these screens, you can always add in your own content to what we've mapped out here for students to read. You also have the ability to hide screens as a whole. So if there's something in here that you're not necessarily covering in the course, you can always hide those individual screens and still assign the lesson. Now I'm going to go ahead and pop into that second mode here of practice. And practice is exactly what it sounds like for students. It's a penalty-free environment that you can jump in and start answering these practice style questions before they're moving to the actual graded portion of the homework lesson. So we are giving students these algorithmically generated questions to work through here, as well as access to these learning aids down here at the bottom of the screen. I'll walk through each of those to show you what that looks like from the student perspective. This first one here is our tutor button. So if a student got to a question and just had no idea where to begin, they can always access tutor here, which will pull the question that they're struggling with and break it out step by step, kind of holding their hand through the solution process. So that's especially helpful in all of our mathematics titles. Now, of course, with the humanities disciplines, students don't necessarily need to break a question out step by step, but it will pull a helpful hint for them. So that will usually contain relevant definitions or examples for students, just to get them thinking in the right direction of how to begin answering this particular question. Now, if something still isn't clicking from this tutor screen here, students can always go back to Learn, where that content was covered in those Learn screens, or click on Solution to see a fully worked out solution and that correct answer displayed. So keep in mind, they do have that unlimited solutions manual with these practice questions in the homework mode here. Our next learning aid that I wanted to show you here is our Try Similar button. So if a student gets to a question and wants extra practice on any particular topic, they can click Try Similar as many times as they need to in order to get in that extra practice. Each of our questions has up to 50 different versions of it, so students really can get that unlimited practice environment as they're working through this practice mode here. Now I'm going to go ahead and answer a question here just to show you the level of feedback that students are getting as they're answering questions within practice and potentially making mistakes. You know, homework is the time where students are making mistakes. And so right away in the practice mode, when a student gets a question incorrect, of course, it'll flag it for them here, letting them know that their answer was incorrect. But as a student, I can always click on this Explain Error button, which will pull the question that I was just presented with and not only tell me that my answer was wrong, but why my answer was wrong. So keep in mind that our system has artificial intelligence that anticipates and diagnoses these common student errors that are made here in the platform in an effort to stop students in their tracks right away when they do make a mistake and let them know exactly where they've gone wrong. So as you can see here in this particular instance, my answer was incorrect, but it goes on to tell me why. So in this particular question, I correctly found the y coordinate of the vertex of this function, and I made a sign error on the x coordinate of the vertex. Now, for my non-math people in here, this might look like a separate language for you, but it will give that explain error feedback across all of our disciplines and titles. In psychology, if a student made a mistake, demonstrating, what an example of the just world hypothesis might look like, or in our English titles, making a mistake with a proper noun, whatever it looks like, students do get that feedback in real time so that they can go back to practice, click try similar, and remediate those mistakes in real time. We always say this explain error feedback is the type of feedback that you would hope to give your students if you were able to sit down with each one of them as they're working through every single practice question here. Now, this skip button here allows students to kind of skip around here in the practice mode. So keep in mind, by default, practice is not required by students. So students can skip around and really just focus on question types that they feel like they're struggling on. This last one here is our send to instructor button. And this is an optional feature that you can turn on or off within Hawks, but I like it because it allows students to take a screenshot of a question and send it to you directly. So if there's something that they're struggling on, or maybe want to talk through during office hours, you can see the exact version of the question that they're looking at and help students as they're working through concepts that they might be struggling on. Now, at any point, students can pop out of practice and head into that final mode of certify, which is the credit-bearing portion of the 3 learning modes. So this is what students are completing for a grade within the course. It really is just our fancy word for homework. A couple of things to note about certify. The first is that the question types are very similar to what students just worked through in practice. So we're not going to throw students for a loop when they finally get to the homework portion here. If they did spend any time up front within that practice mode, it certainly wasn't wasted. It'll ultimately better prepare them for the questions that are coming their way within certify. Now, the biggest difference between practice and certify is that we've removed the learning aids down here at the bottom of the screen. Students can no longer access that tutor, skip, or try similar button. And ultimately, we just want to hold students accountable while they're in here completing these Hawks homework lessons to be able to stand on their own and ultimately prove mastery of this content. At any point, we don't want students to become overly reliant on the learning aids that we provide to them within practice. And we do want to be very transparent with them here. If there is something that they're struggling on, let's let them know here in the homework lesson. We do consider these to be lower stakes assignments, so it's totally fine if students are making mistakes. We just want to be very transparent with them versus waiting for that next test or quiz in the course or paper to be the first time that they're finding out, geez, I guess I didn't really know this concept so well. With other systems, we hear all the time that, students score 100% on those homework lessons, and then come test time, those scores simply don't translate. And it's oftentimes because they don't have the separation of learning aids within that actual homework portion. Now, another unique thing about the Hawks homework lessons here is that we do use a mastery-based approach for these. So what that means is we're asking students to reach a mastery level here at around 80%. In order to achieve credit on their homework. And by credit, I mean 100% in the gradebook once they've reached or exceeded the mastery level of the lesson here. So in this particular set, we've given students 20 questions. Of those 20, they have a little bit of wiggle room. So that 4 inside the red heart here indicates the number of questions that they can miss, and they're still within that mastery threshold of the lesson here. Now, if a student dips below and misses a 5th question in this set, our system will take them out of certify and place them back into the practice mode with a custom set of questions based on what they just missed in certify. So there is that adaptive remediation that's built into our system to allow students to go back to that penalty-free environment, really focus on the question types that they're struggling on. And of course, they can access the learning aids and the error-specific feedback that we just walked through. Now, at any point, students can come back in and attempt those certify lessons again. So we're never going to block them out of certify or take off points when they dip below the mastery level. They truly have unlimited attempts when it comes to completing these Hawks homework lessons and ultimately scoring that 100% in the gradebook. Now, I will say, I'm sure we'll get some questions about what's customizable within Hawks. Pretty much everything you're seeing here in these 3 modes is customizable. So you can change anything from the content of that learn mode, like I showed you. You can also, from the instructor gradebook, pick and choose which questions students are seeing for practice and certify. You can also alter the number of questions that students are presented with if you wanted to make them higher or lower. And finally, you can also adjust the mastery level of each lesson. So by default, that 80% is what we've selected for all of the Hawks lessons. But of course, as the instructor, you can go in and change that to make it higher or lower based on what you think will work best for your students. But we really have found that 80% to be a sweet spot for students, allowing some room for a few errors here and there, but still asking students to reach that mastery level of at about a B level. Now, the final thing that I wanted to show you here within the Hawks homework lessons is one thing that students have access to all on their own when they're completing these lessons. Well, let's see here. Looks like my screen might be frozen. All right, well, at the end of the presentation today, I'll go in and show you how students can create their own practice web tests, but I guess we can circle back since I did share that 3-mode learning path with you, how we can connect those different elements to the Hawks learning platform here and what I've shared with you. There we go. So now that you're able to see the online courseware and that 3-mode learning path, I do want to circle back to the elements that we discussed in the beginning of today's presentation and how we can draw on these different elements to create one large effective learning tool. So this first one being equity. So I've listed out a couple of things here, and I just included that definition that I shared at the beginning of today's presentation here at the top. So creating an accessible and inclusive learning environment that provides available support to each student, regardless of their level of needs. So I've listed out a couple of things here that you can find within the Hawks system. The first being adaptive learning. So when students are missing questions within that certified mode, like I just shared with you, it does place them back into that practice mode with that customized learning path for them based on the areas that they might be struggling with and the questions that they missed in certify. The next here being diagnostic assessments. So this is an optional feature within Hawks. And as an instructor, you can create diagnostic assessments for students, which is especially helpful in courses where you feel like students are kind of coming in at all different levels. You can make any test in Hawks diagnostic just by simply checking a box and setting that proficiency level that you're looking for from your students. So basically, students will go in and complete that diagnostic assessment. And based on their score for any lessons within that test that they meet or exceed that proficiency level that you've set for them, they will then test out of having to complete those lessons, and they'll only be assigned the lessons where they did not meet that proficiency level. So in other words, giving students kind of a customized learning path based on their personal areas of weaknesses and where they're coming in with prior knowledge to the course. We see this a lot in the English world. We do have a pre-created grammar diagnostic assessment that a lot of instructors will use at the beginning of the semester just to gauge where students are at with things that they don't necessarily have time to, cover a whole unit on, grammar review. So it does give students that extra practice, and you can kind of outsource some of that practice for students within the Hawks learning platform. That way you can really focus on the topics that you're hoping to cover with those students, and they can come in, prepared to talk about those topics because they've worked on those skill and drill exercises outside of class. The next thing here being automatic feedback. So students do receive feedback in real time as they are in the most critical point in the learning process. This helps students to correct their mistakes in real time before those silly mistakes become ingrained into their long-term memory and are later repeated on the tests and quizzes in your course. The next one I have here is step-by-step. So as you saw in the student demonstration, we do allow students to have access to that interactive tutor feature as they're in the practice mode. So that step-by-step guidance that students receive ensures that even when they're working on their homework outside of those normal classroom hours, they can get guidance every step of the way while they're answering those questions. So even when you're not right there in front of them, for them to, raise their hand and ask you, what's step one here? Where do I get started? And lastly, we have our mastery-based approach. And I do want to slow down for a minute here because this is one of the biggest differentiators between Hawks versus other systems that are out there. Our assignments are unique in that they require students to prove knowledge of a concept as a whole, as opposed to individual pieces of that concept or on a per question basis. So instead of allowing students to accept a mediocre homework grade and thus that corresponding level of comprehension, Hawks does hold students to a higher standard of achievement while they're completing their homework. So this means that if a student is struggling or has difficulty with the subject matter, this will happen in the homework and not on the test or quiz in your course. The motivation for being fully rewarded for working until that goal is reached, coupled with the lack of credit for unsatisfactory effort below the mastery level that you defined, fundamentally shifts the way in which students are learning and interacting with your course content. And then here we have our demonstrated learning over seat time as our last bullet point. So this doesn't necessarily mean a self-paced schedule, but instead provides each student with unlimited opportunities to learn and reach the same level of achievement as their peers, regardless if it takes them a little bit more time to get there. So that unlimited practice environment that we cater for students within that practice mode, and then giving them as many chances as they need to on those certified lessons to get that credit. Next, we have engagement. So keep in mind the engagement boxes that are scattered throughout the learn mode are things that you can pull out and incorporate into class time in order to spark meaningful discussion. So I think I commented on a couple of these as we were going through the learn mode. And you'll find a lot more of these in the humanities titles versus our mathematics titles. We do have, examples for students to work through and videos, but we also have, those group activity suggestions, reflection questions, and links out to other resources that you can pull in and incorporate into class time. So wanted to note a couple more of those here on the screen with our co-requisite titles. Specifically, we have our making connections and looking forward boxes. So really just laying out for students why they're learning this. I'm sure as instructors, you get that question all the time. Why am I learning this concept? When am I going to use this? The making connections will help students to see those connections between the concepts that they're learning and how they're going to use them. And then the looking forward will give them a sneak peek of what's coming down the line as they're working through some of the remedial concepts in the co-rec course, what's coming their way, and when will they use these skills in the credit level topics. We do have those example and lesson level videos that I shared with you. And then an optional print resource for several of our titles is our guided notebook. And this is an optional resource that you can choose to pair with the online software. It pairs up with the learn mode where all of the content is covered for those lessons. And it's essentially just a work text for students to get guidance through the note-taking process and have something physical in their hands that they can refer to as a study tool. And some instructors will incorporate those guided notebooks into class time. So having students reading before they're coming to class, bringing that filled out guided notebook to class for a notebook check or to talk through what they've put in there as the answers. So if you are curious about a particular title with Hawks, just double check with your school's representative to get review copies and see if a guided notebook is an option with that course. Next, we have feedback. So we know that in all courses, each student brings a unique level of prior knowledge of the content and will learn at different speeds. Some students may need to review, reread, learn, watch the instructional videos again, or even utilize more of the tutorials that we have available within practice. Our intelligent feedback allows students to take advantage of those resources, even if they are initially unsuccessful, and continue trying. So here I've just included a screenshot of what that explain error looks like that we went through today. And of course, students can get that feedback across all of our titles and disciplines to be able to pinpoint where they went wrong on answering a question. And the most important thing, try again. Next, we have remediation. So as you've seen, the Hawks lessons here are adaptive to personalize the learning experience for each student. So if they are unsuccessful in reaching that mastery level, they're then placed back into that practice mode where they can use our intelligent tutoring or error-specific feedback to remediate any individual skill gaps. So by addressing these deficits in real time, the learning process is much more personalized and efficient for students. So here I've included a couple other things that I wanted to mention within the Hawks software there. We have that adaptive remediation that I just mentioned, and then I was going to share those student created practice tests. If we have a few minutes here at the end of the session today, I'll see if my screen was unfrozen. I think my Wi-Fi was glitching for a second, but students can create their own practice tests or study guides in order to prepare for any upcoming assessments within the course. So it's really nice that students can kind of create these things on their own and test themselves on their knowledge of these concepts, and they will get that same level of feedback and remediation as they do within the Hawks homework lessons. Keep in mind that you can set up certify as formative assessments, so kind of stacking things on top of each other in order to be prepared for those higher stakes assignments in the courses, like tests and quizzes that are kind of made up of all of those smaller lessons and chapters that we're testing students on within the certify mode. Let's see here. The next one I wanted to mention here is scalability and sustainability. So the reporting tools that Hawks offers can help give you an understanding of where your students are struggling in real time. This way you can more efficiently pinpoint the student who might be at risk of falling behind, or the specific question type that most of your students are struggling with on a particular lesson. This understanding allows educators to provide faster support on any part of the required material where your students are struggling. I've included a few of our reporting tools on this slide that we offer to instructors, and it was honestly hard to narrow these down. I will say we have tons of reporting options within the Hawks platform, and we certainly don't expect instructors to use all of our reporting tools, but I always mention how many we have, just because if you have specific goals in mind for your course, or you're hoping to measure something specific, chances are there's already a report that's kind of running in the background to compile that data for you. So a couple that I've listed here are our search by criteria, where you can filter out students based on their grades or activity level. One thing that's really nice about this report here is that you can save your filters and run them every week or every month, whatever you'd like, so that you can kind of check in on student progress based on how often you'd like to check, filter out students who haven't logged in for a certain number of days, or filter out students with overall grades between a specific range. We also have that send to instructor button, like I shared within practice. So allowing students to take that screenshot of a question and send it to you directly. That way you can be that intervention point when students are already struggling. We also have our assignment reviewer tool, which is probably my favorite tool within the Hawks platform. It combines a couple of our reports all in one, but it gives you, general data about your course on a wide scale, kind of bird's eye view. How well are my class sections performing? But it is flexible enough to allow you to whittle down to individual sections or students and really take a look at how well they're progressing through the course. Is there a particular question that a student is missing, or a particular lesson that a student has attempted 4 times and just couldn't certify? So that will give you help to kind of spot any red flags among your students and intervene at those points as well. And then the last one here is ease of sharing courses. I did want to mention this here, especially because we have so many departments that are using Hawks on a wider scale. If you wanted to, set up a master course shell within Hawks and then push it out to everyone who teaches the course, any customizations or anything that you set up in that master course shell is easily shareable among instructors, especially for courses who, might have a lot of adjuncts teaching, and you just need to, kind of push out that master course shell to everyone so that they're ready to go. Next, we have flexibility. So within the instructor side of Hawks, you do have the ability to adjust due dates and customize the course design. You can even adjust assessments to accommodate each student's learning needs. So I've included a couple things here on the bullets, and these are just ways that you can make the course more flexible depending on what pops up for students. So of course, you can adjust deadlines on a per student basis if a student was coming to you asking for an extension or anything like that. You can also drop the lowest assignment, so the lowest 2 quiz scores or whatever that looks like for you. You do have the ability to do that within the Hawks gradebook. We do have a test settings by student option, which allows you to create a student's own web test settings for any of the tests or quizzes in your course. This is especially helpful if you have a student that, requires extra time on every single assessment or quiz or test in your course. You can kind of create that student's own setting there so that you don't have to go in and set that up every single time you have an assessment coming up. You do have flexibility with the lesson due dates, so you can make a course, outlined by due dates that are coming up, or you can make it self-paced and allow students a more flexible work schedule as they're working through the homework lessons. You do have the option to set a lesson late penalty. So if you wanted to penalize late work in your course for any of the homework lessons, you do have a lot of options in there for what that looks like and how you handle late work in your course. Like I said earlier, you can customize that mastery level and really customize it to what you think will work best for your students. So whether it's that 80% by default or adjusting from there, you have the ability to customize in that way. And the last one here is our Flex Mastery option. And I did want to mention this one here because it does add another layer of flexibility on those certified homework lessons. So within the Hawks demo that I shared with you, I showed you in the certify mode our strike system. So that number that was inside the red heart indicated the number of questions that students could miss on a lesson in order to fit within that mastery range. When Flex Mastery is turned on, it basically adds another layer of flexibility to that strike system. So when Flex Mastery is turned on and a student gets a question incorrect within certify, instead of just taking one of their strikes or labs away from them right off the bat, it pops up with a message for students that says, would you like to accept a strike for this incorrect answer or retry this question with new values? So this is one thing that you can turn on, and I actually encourage it for a lot of our higher level math courses, where students are spending 5 to 10 minutes working out problems and those higher level math courses. And when they just make a silly mistake, answer that question incorrect and say, oh, I know exactly what I did wrong. I wish I had another shot at this question. Flex Mastery is a great option to kind of cut down on any student frustration if they felt like, oh, I just wish I had one more chance on that question. Next, we have evidence-based analysis and decision-making. So the ongoing review of where students stand in relation to their goals for learning provides a more realistic picture to both students and educators. Here at Hawks, we believe that assessment shouldn't be a final judgment at a time when student has no hope of changing the outcome. So in other words, if the first time that they're finding out what it is they don't know on an assignment, on a high stakes test, it can oftentimes feel too late for students. So the Hawks reporting tools here will give you intervention opportunities before you're at that too late point for students. So you can check in on daily, monthly, or weekly progress here as students are moving through their coursework. And I know I mentioned that assignment reviewer tool a little bit earlier. This is just a screenshot from that tool and what it looks like for students from our analytics tab. So this will show you commonly missed questions among your students and kind of where they're at overall for a specific homework lesson. So this is something that you can check on. And, if you said, whoa, 45% of you all missed question 1 on last night's homework lesson, you can pull this up in class. There's no student data on it. It really is just data on those commonly missed questions. And within this report, you can actually click on that question 1 there, and it will generate a similar question type to what your students saw on that homework lesson. So just giving you the opportunity to intervene as you're spotting those red flags of, several of my students are struggling on this topic. I'm going to take that first 5 minutes of class, during the first 5 minutes of class time to go over that topic with them and make sure that they have a better understanding. And then here, the long-term goal for students is always to develop those lifelong learning habits. We know that mastering skills takes persistence and translates to long-term achievement orientation for students. With mastery, students do develop lifelong learning habits, and they learn how to persevere and demonstrate that they can transfer their knowledge to new contexts. They can also apply these skills that they've learned to subsequent courses throughout their college careers. So I just wanted to end on this note here to show you the image that students receive when they do hit that mastery level of a lesson. So they do earn that 100% in the grade book. And for some students, especially in mathematics courses, this might be the first 100% that they've ever received on their homework lessons. So holding students to that higher standard of achievement up front in these homework lessons, it does incentivize students, to work towards that goal and ultimately score that 100% in the grade book. But thank you all for joining today's session. And I hope that the information that I shared with you today is applicable to your courses, no matter what discipline that you're teaching in. I think we do have a few minutes here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we have in the Q&A box.
Yes, we do have some questions that have come in. I'll go ahead and read them out. The first one I have here is the Learn Mode identical to the printed textbook, but presented online with additional interactive content? Or would students read the print book and then complete the Learn section online?
Great question. So nope, it is identical to the printed book. There's no additional content or anything within the Learn Mode except for those multimedia resources. So there's more inside the Learn Mode there. And the idea is that, if you're comfortable with students not having to get a physical book, they always have the full ebook included within their purchase of an access code, as well as those Learn Modes that are already kind of broken out into those smaller bite-sized chunks for students. The idea of them not having to flip to page 300, it's just right there in front of them, already set for them for what they need to read.
Great, thank you. I do see a comment here, and Elizabeth, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. You mentioned time on task, which we do have a lot of reports related to time on task. I know Laura mentioned a little bit related to that. So if you had a specific question or anything additional to share, please chime in there. We have another question here. Do students see their grade for each practice session and then start a new one if they are not satisfied with their grade yet?
So yes, students can see how well they're progressing through the course. Now, keep in mind the practice session isn't graded by default. When they do work through a set of practice questions, it will give them a recommendation based on their score within the practice mode of whether or not our system thinks they're ready to move on to certify. So, it'll say either looks like you did a great job in practice, go ahead and move forward to certify, but it'll also give them a reminder to continue practicing if they did not, perform well in the practice mode. Now with certify, those are the actual graded homework lessons for the course. They will get their score immediately as they're working through all of the homework lessons. All of the grading is automated, and it's designed to give students that feedback in real time. They do have unlimited attempts on those certify lessons though, so it's totally fine if they don't certify on their first attempt. It'll give them a new set of questions just to go back from the beginning to really hold them accountable on mastering that content there in the lesson, but they do have unlimited attempts up until that due date that you've set for them.
Thank you. Another question here, can we revise the actual questions and answers too?
So you can pick and choose which questions that you're pulling from the default curriculum for the Hawks homework lessons. We do have a question builder tool that actually allows you to build out your own questions and answers. So not necessarily revising the Hawks questions just for accessibility purposes, but you do have the ability to build out your own. If there's a question that you say, I like this, but I would add this here or there, you can always make your own version of that question and assign it to students for homework or for tests and quizzes.
Thank you. Here's another one. How will I be able to assign these baguettes or badgets? I'm not sure if there was a typo there or if I'm misunderstanding, but I'm assuming, how do I assign these lessons maybe?
Yeah,
and please type in the Q&A if you can clarify.
Yeah, I think that one came in from Manal. I work with her and they're piloting Hawks this semester. So you go into the instructor gradebook to get those lessons assigned. And by default, it's just kind of a blank canvas. So, by default, we don't automatically assign every lesson that's available in Hawks. It's really nice that you can go in and customize to pick and choose which lessons you're assigning to students based on your course objectives and the topics that you cover within the course.
Thank you. How do teachers balance the time students need to implement a Hawks course with the established curriculum that students already have to accomplish?
Well, we are here to help. So I will say, I will make mention of our wonderful training and support team. I know Kristen is a member of that and Faith here too. We are here to help you transition over to Hawks, not just your first semester using, but at any point throughout the implementation process. So our support team here is wonderful. If you haven't had the chance to work with us quite yet, we are a smaller company and we really are able to offer that family style level of support. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, but interested in implementing Hawks into your courses, just reach out to your Hawks representative and we're happy to work with you to see what course goals you have in mind, what you're picturing in mind for your course, and how we can help you get there. You know, we work with so many schools across the country and we have some wonderful implementation ideas as well that we're happy to share with you. You know, if you're envisioning something in your course, but you're just not quite sure how to do that or set it up within Hawks, that's what we're here for.
Definitely. Can you customize the percentage students must achieve to get a recommendation to go ahead and certify?
So I believe you can. I believe that if you wanted to go in and actually require practice, which is an option, you can customize that percentage that students have to achieve or answer before they're able to move on to certify. So that's one thing I did want to mention is that by default, practice is not required, but you certainly can require it. You can either require it right off the bat before students enter into certify, where you can customize that mastery percentage to move on, or you can require it after a failed number of attempts at certify. So if you wanted to give students the option to jump straight to certify, but if they fail that attempt once, they're then required to go back to practice and complete those questions that they missed, you can set that up within Hawks as well.
Great. And one other comment here, Elizabeth shared a little bit more. Thank you, Elizabeth. She said, I love the report that allows her to see how long the student worked on practice and then certify. I can help the student to understand that more time on task may lead to a deeper learning that will increase the scores on the chapter test.
Absolutely. I was going to say, as an instructor too, you know, even if you're not requiring that practice mode or, you know, using those guided notebooks as a way to almost require the readings for the course, as an instructor, you can see all of the time on task data for your course to really go in and see where students are spending their time, what topics they're struggling on, and how you can intervene at those points. Great. Are those all the questions we have today? Thank y'all so much for joining. I hope you have a wonderful conference. We've got some great sessions going on all day today and tomorrow. So I appreciate everyone being here with me today.